Speaking to it, see if it comes out.
Hello, hello, hello. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا بالقرآن وذكر الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا وأصلح لنا شأننا كله لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد فقال حجة الإسلام الإمام al-Ghazali رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم فاعلم أن في كل واحدة منها كلاما كثيرا وقد أشبعنا القول فيه في كتابي الأحياء والأسرار ونحن نذكر هاهنا ما لا بد من ذكره ولا يقع الغنى عنه فنقول وبالله التوفيق. Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, if you remember last week we've now talked about the four core fundamental diseases or four fundamental characteristics of the heart that are destructive to the human being. And then he said now he will mention some of the essential features of them that we can then help to combat these diseases. So having explained the dangers of them, so the first section was all explaining the dangers of them. If you remember, the four things were, anyone? What were the four things? Sorry? Not these four. No, you're talking about the other four obstacles. These are the four core diseases. Pride, haste, envy, and the last one, long hopes. Yeah. So pride, arrogance, obviously is the same thing. Envy, long hopes, and hastiness. So he described the dangers of them. Now he's going to give us the essential ways to combat these things. Once again, he says, first of all, that to get into much more detail, you can go to his other books, Ihya Ulumuddin and Asrar. I can't remember the full title of the book right now. But he says here, we're going to give you just the bare minimum that you require, the knowledge that you require to fight these diseases. أما الأمل فقال أكثر علمائنا رحمهم الله إن إرادة الحياة للوقت المتراخي بالحكم إنه إرادة الحياة للوقت المتراخي بالحكم وقصر الأمل ترك الحكم فيه بأن تقيده بالاستثناء بمشيئة الله تعالى وعلمه في الذكر. So we've done this one, isn't it?
Yeah,
last time.
yeah.
We mentioned all this one about the amal, the long hopes, and the treatment of that, or the opposite of that is if you have any hope to be living more than the next breath, you should always put the istithna, insha'Allah, and also to say that there should be salah, so you should have a good, that it should be good, you should do good actions in that time. In other words, don't long or think about having a longer life without putting those two conditions. First of all, insha'Allah, and secondly, that it be a good life in which I do good actions. So we'll just come to the end of that short section where he says فعليك بترك الحكم في ذكر البقاء وإرادته والمراد بالذكر ذكر القلب. Now, by the way, I mean he's using the word hukum in a different type of context than normally it's used. It's meaning to make something definite. Yeah? to make something. So don't think of, have these long hopes as in a definite sense. I will always say inshallah. Hukm from the meaning of mahkam, something that always muhkam, something that is definitive. And he says, what I mean here by remembering or thinking of having a long life, it means with the heart. So having these hopes in the heart of having a long life. ثم المراد منه التوطين على ذلك. And what I mean by that is when it becomes established in the heart. So he's not talking about if you have just a flying thought that comes into your head of having a long life or so on. It's only when someone becomes fixed on that hopes, those long hopes, that's when it's a problem. Yeah? So we see this, you see this in so many people, whether they're non-Muslims or Muslims. This fixed belief in their heart that their life is going to extend and extend for a long time. It's almost like a certainty with them. Yeah, you know this thing, you hear this phrase like, you never thought it could happen to you. When people get killed or accidents happen, but people won't think it will happen to them. It's a delusion that a human being falls into, that this can't happen to me. Any things that happen always happen to other people. So especially the thing with death, people just completely block from their mind. Is one of the things that Shaykh Hamza mentioned once, that we can understand this as a defense mechanism. Look at defense mechanisms, psychological defense mechanisms. One of them is called defense. No, not defense, it's called denial. Okay? So this happens, denial happens when something is so traumatic to the psyche that the person will unconsciously just block it out completely. Okay? Something that is so terrible, so difficult for the person to handle psychologically, it can then become denied. For example, someone beloved to you dies. Often people will go into a state of denial for some time. The person that's closest, they might just completely deny the person's dead and carry on as if they're still alive. Why? Because just the actual, they're unable to process that psychologically. It's too traumatic. So similarly, thinking about death, thinking that death could come at any time. For human beings, difficult to, unless they're strong in their iman and strong in their faith that they're going to return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثم الأمل ضربان أمل العامة وأمل الخاصة. So then he says, going into further detail with this thing about having long hopes in life, in living a long time, he says there's two types. We can divide it into two categories. The hopes of the normal people and the hopes of the elect. The elect, he means those people of strong iman. And the Amma, he means the normal Muslims who are not people of strong iman. فَأَمَلُ الْعَامَّةِ. So even those who have strong iman, they can fall into a type of amal, false hopes as well. That's what he's going to try to say. فَأَمَلُ الْعَامَّةِ أن تريد الحياة والبقاء لجمع الدنيا وتمتع بها. The long hopes of the normal people is simply that they want to have a long life so that they can enjoy the dunya, the pleasures of the dunya, to gather more and more. So that's the normal average hubbud dunya, the love of the dunya. And this is why we see that such a feature of today's people today, especially including Muslims, because we've fallen into that disease of hubbud dunya, as the Prophet ﷺ predicted would be the case with Muslims later on towards the end of time. In fact, there's so many sahih hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he's told the Sahaba, I don't fear for you to fall into shirk. I don't fear for you that you'll go astray in terms of your aqidah. The thing I fear for you is love of the dunya, love of the world. and that the worldly pleasures will be opened up for you, so that you will chase after them like the people before you chased after them, and it will destroy you. The love of the world will destroy you as it destroyed those before you. This is what the Prophet ﷺ, the guidance he gave us, the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ is there for a reason. So there's people now that devote their whole life saying that I want to combat the shirk in the ummah. Where the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't fear for you these things of falling into shirk. I fear for you that you'll fall into this, that the love of dunya. This is the thing we have to be fighting against. وَهَذِهِ مَعْصِيَةٌ مَحْضَةٌ. So it says this type of amal of the normal people is the straightforward one that we understand is a clear disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when someone becomes obsessed with the pleasures of this world, and to the point they may neglect their duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because don't forget, from the duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not just the fard ayn, but there's also fard kifayat as well. The fard kifaya is just a duty as strong as the fard ayn, if not stronger, because the furud kifayat normally are those things which are for the benefit of the community, for the wider society. So it's very important to remember that the fard kifayas are just as important for us as the fard ayn, because sometimes we become, especially in this sort of secular environment, we just become involved with just what's our fard ayn. I have to pray 5 times a day, I have to fast, and that's it, Now I'm doing my fard, and I can go ahead and just chase after all the pleasures of the dunya as long as I'm doing those things. But no, there's fard kifaya as well. And the Quran doesn't differentiate. The Quran doesn't say this is fard kifaya, fard ayn. It's just as fard it comes. Just like it says kutiba alaykum as-siyam, kutiba alaykum al-qital. Just like fasting is prescribed upon you, fighting is prescribed upon you. But of course the ulama then understand that to be not upon every single person, but there has to be enough people to fulfill that obligation. It's an obligation, And all the other fard kifayat as well of providing scholars for the Muslim community is one of the highest obligations. Every Muslim community must have people who can teach the deen. In all of those sciences which are fard, like tajweed of Quran, tafsir of Quran, hadith, fiqh, aqidah, all of these things, they have to be taught, and you have to have qualified people to teach them. That's fard kifaya in every community. And even more stronger obligations upon the community to feed the poor people amongst the community, to take care of the orphans of that community, because these were some of the first obligations that came down with the revelation. وأما الخاصة وأمل الخاصة أن تريد البقاء لإتمام عمل الخير فيه خطر. So now the more slightly complicated or subtle one is those people who are the khasa, the more elect of the believers. They can also fall into false hopes in a way that they think, I would like to live longer and longer, but to do good actions. To do good actions. But sometimes this can become like a trick. They've tricked themselves, And he explains further, هو ما لا يستيقن والصلاح له فيه فإنه ربما يكون خير معين لا يكون للعبد فيه أو في إتمامه صلاح بأن يقع بسببه في آفة لا يقوم بها هذا الخير. So, it may be a good intention to have a longer life, to do good actions, But Imam al-Ghazali is pointing out, how do you know that the good actions will go as you hope or you plan? How do you know you may not fall into some problems with your good actions? Yeah? So there are dangers even in these type of long hopes. How do you know your actions are being accepted from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do you know, you might not slip into something that could be like an afa, calamity within your good actions. فإذا ليس للعبد إذن ابتداء في صلاة أو صوم أو غيره أن يحكم بأنه يتمه إذ هو غيب. So he says, whenever you start any good action, whether it is salah or sawm, don't ever be sure that you will complete that good action in a way that is acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا أَنْ يَقْصِدَ ذَلِكَ قَطْعًا. And never be sure and certain of your good actions themselves. لأنه ربما لا يكون له فيه صلاح بل يقير ذلك بالاستثناء وشرط الصلاح. Once again, always put in the istithna, insha'Allah. I will complete my fast today, insha'Allah. And salah, meaning, and inshallah, it will be acceptable. It will be a good action, it will be accepted. It will be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not any type of shirk in it, not any type of showing off. So that's what he's saying once again. If you hope to have more life to do more good actions, always add these two conditions. That I want to live long enough to do Hajj, let's say. We know the Prophet ﷺ used to make dua, before Ramadan. He used to say, oh Allah, take us to Ramadan. Because that was such a great blessing, a great month that was coming. After Sha'ban, he used to make dua during Sha'ban, let us come to Ramadan. But if you make that type of dua, let me get to Ramadan or let me get to Hajj, always say, I will do the Hajj insha'Allah, and it will be accepted, it will be for the sake of Allah. So add those two things. Because you may start the Hajj and you may die, or you might, you don't know what's going to happen if you complete the action or not. So always say insha'Allah, and always say that insha'Allah it will be for the sake of Allah. That's what it means by salah. ليخلص من عيب الأمل. As long as you do put in these two conditions, then you will not be falling into the trap of amal, having amal, long hopes in this world. قال الله تعالى لنبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تقولن لشيء إني فاعل ذلك غدا إلا أن يشاء الله. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, do not say about anything, I will do that tomorrow, except if Allah wills. And of course the Prophet ﷺ would only intend to do good things, So just showing that even if you having hopes to do good things, tomorrow, next Ramadan, the Hajj or whatever, always put in insha'Allah. وضد هذا الأمل فيما قاله العلماء النية. وإنما قالوا ذلك على ضرب من الاتساع لأن الناوية بالنية المحمودة يكون ممتنعا من الأمل. So this is what is the opposite of having these type of hopes in the world. As the ulama have said, is the opposite of that is to have a correct intention. To have a correct intention. And he says, they have mentioned this not as literally to mean the opposite of having long hopes is intention, but they mention this because someone who has a correct intention, he can't fall into that trap of having false hopes. فهذا حكم العمل والنية المحمودة إذ قد مست الحاجة إلى معرفتها مع أنها الأصل الأصيل. So he says, first of all, this is the I've dealt now with amal, having long hopes, but he says, we mentioned this thing, the niyyah, the correct intention, and he says, let's mention what exactly that means, because this is the actual core of the core, to have the correct intention. is al-Asl al-Asil, the core of the core. What that means, actually the whole of tasawwuf is all about correcting one's intention. If you had to, nail it down, the whole study of this whole science of tasawwuf, of purification, is just to make our intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As long as there is any diseases in the heart like kibr, which would lead to things like riya and hasad and these things, our intentions will never be fully for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because somehow or another we're still feeding our own egos, our own kibr. Yeah? So the whole purpose of tasawwuf is to get rid of that takabbur, and so that our intentions become purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, so that's why he says this niyyah, this having a good niyyah, is actually the asalul asil, the foundation of the foundations. Foundation of foundations. قالوا رحمهم الله في حدها الجامع التام. So he says, as the ulama have mentioned in the actual definition of a good intention, and this is once again a very technical definition, a very precise definition. إن النية الصحيحة المحمودة إرادة أخذ عمل مبتدأ به قبل سائر الأعمال بالحكم مع إرادة إتمامه بالتفويض والاستثناء. Yeah. Very technical, and that's the nature of scholarly discourses. When they define something, they have to be very precise. So you can see how the Muslims, they were sort of pioneering this type of, scientific type of discourse. Yeah? Very precise definitions. Because to build up any field of knowledge, you have to be able to define things precisely. So what does it mean by a praiseworthy, correct intention? Yeah? It means to iradatu, and this is one of always the downfalls of definitions as well. Sometimes it's not possible to define things without using the actual term itself. So irada really means niyyah anyway as well. Yeah, to choose, or to choose to do an action, or to choose to begin an action. Bil hukmi, he means once again a definite, a definite intention to begin the action, and a desire to finish the action, but with tafweed and istithna. Meaning, when we begin the action, we can have a form of definitiveness to it because we're actually beginning it now. So once we begin the action, we don't have to say insha'Allah because we already began the action. You see what I mean? But for the action to actually be completed, we have to say insha'Allah, and we have to do tafweed, meaning once again to say that we hope that Allah makes it acceptable. Interesting to see how they translated that particular definition in English.
If we give entrustment to Allah.
No, the whole thing, the definition of a good niyyah.
Correct and praiseworthy intention is the decisive proposal to perform a deed immediately before all other deeds, as well as the wish to bring it to completion, combined with tafweed and istidana. We'll be saying if Allah's wills.
Okay. Is that Mukhtar Holland?
Yeah.
Yeah. She'll have to get the key to open. She needs to get the key. She knows where it is. فإن قيل فلما جاز الحكم في الابتداء ووجب التفويض والاستثناء في الإتمام يقال له لفقد الخطر في الابتداء. It just goes into a sort of side issue. So why can we say that when we start the action it is definite, but for completing the action or continuing even the action we have to have the istithna and tafweed? He says because when you start, you've already, that's a definite thing. You start it now. You don't have to say If I start fasting now, I'm not going to say inshallah I'm fasting, because I am fasting, but what I say is inshallah I will have to finish this fast, and it will be something acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see what I mean? You don't say inshallah for something that you're already doing, because it's for things in the future. Yeah? إذ هو في حال الابتداء ليس بشيء متراخٍ عنك ولثبوت الخطر في الإتمام. However, completing or even continuing the action, that's where you're not sure whether you will continue or complete the action, or whether it will be acceptable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إذ هو يقع في وقت متراخٍ ففيه الخطران. خطر الوصول, he says there's two unpredictabilities. Once you start the action, there's two things which are unpredictable. One is خطر الوصول, will you actually complete the action? هل لا تدري هل تصل إلى ذلك أم لا؟ وخطر الفساد, and the danger of the action being corrupted or unacceptable. لا تدري هل في ذلك صلاح أم لا. فإذا وجب الاستثناء لخطر الوصول وتفويض لخطر الفساد، فإذا حصلت الإرادة على هذه الشروط تكون حينئذ نية محمودة. So as long as, he said once again, as long as you put in these two conditions in your intention, it will be a praiseworthy intention. مخرجتان عن حد الأمل وآفته. You will not fall into the trap of having false hopes. فتأمل جدا. So he says, think very deeply about this. فهذه هذه. So this is this. How do you translate that bit? هذه هذه. Right, the last.
Okay, someone may ask, why is it permissible to make a decisive proposal to say in the beginning of the deed?
Just the end of that paragraph? Right,
the answer to this would be...
no, the end, right, just last sentence sort of thing.
He breaks it down to 2 points. There are
Yeah.
2 risks in the practice.
After that,
if the proposal is made on these conditions, the intention will be praiseworthy, exempt from over-expectation and its dire consequences. You must therefore consider all this with very great care.
yeah. So you didn't mention, there's last. هذه واعلم أن حسن قصد العمل ذكر الموت. Now it says, the way to guard yourself and to have short hopes is to remember death. I think we talked about this before quite a bit, you know. وحسن حسنه ذكر فجأة الموت وأخذه على غرة وغفلة. So remembering death automatically shortens our expectations and gives us a reality check, we could say in English phrase, yeah? Reality check, because that's what really it is, you know, just to remember and reflect upon death is to bring us back to reality. And he says that the protection of that protection is to reflect upon the suddenness of death. So in other words, not just to reflect upon death itself, because that sometimes may not be enough, because you might think about death, but you might think of it far away. Yeah, now think about certain aspects of death, how it can come very suddenly and unexpectedly, and how your life can be so short, you know. Think about how many years have already passed and how quickly they passed. You know, and how quickly the rest will pass. Yeah? Some of us are already past halfway mark. Yeah? I have any, I think, I hope. Yeah? So it went so quickly, the rest will go quickly as well, even probably quicker. وهو في غرور وفتور. You know, suddenly it will come when you're heedless, you're not thinking about it, you forgot, you know. فاحتفظ بهذه الجملة. So think carefully all these. points that he's mentioned. وَحَصِلْهَا مُوَفَّقًا. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to get to the core understanding of the reality of all of these things. فَإِنَّ الْحَاجَةَ إِلَيْهَا مَاسَّةٌ وَدَعْ عَنْكَ تَضْيِيعَ الْوَقْتِ فِي الْقِيلِ وَالْقَالِ وَمُلَاحَاةِ الرِّجَالِ. So it says, the need for these things is obvious. So don't waste your time in gossiping, talking about this and that, and entertainment. Mulahat from lahu is entertainment. Wallahu al-muwaffiq bifadlih. Allah al-muwaffiq bifadlih. Allah is the one who gives tawfiq through His generosity. So this concept of lahu, it's mentioned in the Quran as well, of entertainment. Just ways that we can just waste our time away without realizing, and it's extremely pertinent in today's society. Because we are in an entertainment culture. These are how the doors of the dunya have been opened up for human beings. Just all entertainment. People in the past, this is why it's very important to study things like sociology and anthropology, because those sciences are there to make people realize how societies have changed. In the past, people never lived like this. For thousands of years, we don't know of any other societies where people live this type of life. For people to listen to music would be like an occasion. When some people come into town, or they have some singers, things like that. To see plays, actors, drama. It would be a certain thing you might do now and then, as entertainment. Now it's for us all the time. We can have these music, films, dramas. So people literally are wasting so much time, and then now the next thing, which is overtaken even films and drama, is computer games. And now computer games, those companies that make computer games are making more money than Hollywood now. Sony and people like that, because that's taken over. So, there's people, Muslim, anyone can fall into that. It's like an addiction, Just start playing computer games. It's entertainment, I'm not saying it's a major haram, kabir or anything like that. But that's what the Quran warns us about as well, the lahu, this type of empty, wasting our time away, wasting our days away in a fantasy world. The way I like to think of it is, just think of someone like in the past, they would, when they didn't have these things, people would just daydream. Fantasize, daydream. Think about someone who just sit around for hours and hours just daydreaming and fantasizing. You think the guy's an idiot. Yeah, but that's literally exactly what the people are doing who are spending hours and hours on computer games. It's exactly the same thing, but it's just made much more real. The fantasy is made much more real to them, And obviously now they just connect you up to all sorts of different people around through the internet. So you're playing with other real players in the game, which makes it much more exciting as well. Much more entertaining, But that's literally what it is, just entertainment, wasting time. Just press any button on it. وَأَمَّا الْحَسَدُ. So, like I said, I'm not saying it's haram. I do let my children play some computer games now and then. But it's the case of, how much you're going to spend your time in just entertainment. And how you're going to neglect the things which are important. We're human beings. We're here for a reason, for a purpose. We're not here to just spend all our days and nights just wasting time. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? أَمْ يَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ خَلَقْنَاهُ عَبَثًا. Does human being believe that he was created عَبَثًا, like just for no reason, just to waste time? You know? وَأَمَّا الْحَسَدُ فَهُوَ إِرَادَةُ زَوَالِ نِعَمِ اللَّهِ عَنْ أَخِيكَ الْمُسْلِمِ. So that's the end of the section Amal. The second one is Hasad. Now, as we've mentioned before many times, Hasad means to wish for a blessing to be removed from your Muslim brother. And he does here specifically mention Muslim brother, but whether it's restricted to that, he doesn't specify. But bear in mind, in the past, people used to live normally within their own communities, So normally you would have been in a Muslim community. Even in Muslim countries where they had other communities, people live in their own quarters, So like in Damascus, you have Christian quarter, Jewish quarter. Even Shia have their own area, and then Sunni is a major, So people used to live amongst their own people, which is natural, and there's nothing wrong with that as well. And in fact, probably it's, as we've seen now, with the experiments they've had in these countries of the melting pots, where they try to put all different cultures in a mix-up, it would be disastrous. There's a great wisdom in actually communities living in their own together, as long as they have mutual respect, respect for each other. Doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with that, and it's natural, and it's good for the reason that you have that community. There's a safety in community from committing sins and from fasad. If you have a whole community which is from the same community, and someone starts dealing drugs, or someone, the community will be able to deal with that. If you have a melting pot with everyone, no one knows anyone, there's no community feeling there, and someone starts doing drugs, or there's someone opens a place for prostitutes or whatever, there's no one's gonna, so it prevents, communities prevent fasad if they're righteous communities. I think, to a big extent, why Western societies, and closely followed by Eastern ones, have fallen into such a degradation in their morality and everything, is because first the breakup of communities, and secondly, then once people become individualized and what they call atomized, and there's no community, no family, extended families, nothing, and then you give them like television and all these things, show them all this corrupt behavior, and there's nothing to stop the people from following it. Because before, people's communities would prevent them. If you live within a community and then you feel ashamed of doing certain things, or being caught of doing certain things. Now there's none of that, So that's what hasad is, yeah. مِمَّا لَهُ فِيهِ صَلَاحٌ. You want the blessing to be stripped away from your Muslim brother or sister, and this is a blessing that is beneficial to him. Once again, making a precise definition, because if the person has something which is actually bad for them, and you want that stripped away, in other words, you want something, then you're wishing good for them, in other words. So that's not hasad. That's something that is good for him, but you want it stripped away. فإن لم تريد زوالها عنه ولكن تريد لنفسك مثلها فهو غبطة. And remember we said, if you don't wish that person to lose that blessing, but you want the blessing as well, that's not hasad, that's ghibta. And sometimes that can be permissible or even good. If you see someone who has, say for example, there's someone who gives a lot of charity, he has got money and he gives a lot of charity, and you wish that you were able to give sadaqah, you had money for that reason, but you don't mean any bad wishes towards that particular person, that's ghibta, that's permissible. And that's in the hadith that he mentions next, where the Prophet ﷺ said, La hasada illa fitnatayn. There's no envy except for in two, and he doesn't mention the rest of the hadith, but you know the hadith of the person who gives sadaqah, etc. Now the Prophet ﷺ has used the word hasad in the hadith, yeah? But the meaning of it is ghibta in that particular hadith. So Imam al-Ghazali explains, كما جاء في الخبر أي لا غبتة إلا في ذلك. فعبر عن الغبتة بالحسد اتساء لمقاربتهما. It's permissible to use the word hasad for ghibta sometimes, as in the hadith, because there's similar meaning.
But ghibta is not sinful.
No, ghibta is not sinful. فإن لم يكن فيها صلاح فأردت زوالها عنه فذلك غيره. فهذا هو الفرق بين هذه الخصال. If the person has got something which is actually harmful to him, and you wish that that thing was stripped away, that's actually غيره, that's actually a good thing, because you want something good for that person.
What's the English of that?
غيره is they normally translate jealousy.
Okay.
How is he translated in English?
Solicitude.
Solicitude.
Form of envy with a good intention.
Form of envy. He doesn't actually translate in one word. Or
No.
does he put the غيره or anything?
Yeah,
He put the Arabic.
Arabic meaning brackets, a form of envy with a good intention.
غيره is, it's quite well known, غيره, if it's for the deen, then it's a good thing, like if someone insults the Prophet ﷺ, you have غيره, you have that jealousy for the deen, in other words, if a man approaches your wife, there is a classic one, the غيره, you feel jealousy, so you then punch him or something. Yeah. As I say, Sayyidina Umar was known for being very much غيره for his women. So people can have it different measures as well, but it's considered a good thing.
So hasad and ghira are the same thing, just that one's good and one's bad. They're both jealousy, right? Or
The little thing with English is hard, with the English you don't have that many terms.
yeah.
But I wouldn't say they're the same thing, I'd say they are different,
Right.
quite different. Hasad and ghibta are similar, hasad and ghibta, because they're both like, you want that thing that the person has. The difference is ghibta, you don't want that person to be stripped of it. That's hasad, that's a very malicious, horrible thing, where you actually want that person to lose the blessing. That's hasad. Ghayra is like a bit different, but it's also, in English it comes down as jealousy.
More contextual.
Hasad, sometimes they say envy, or more correctly, malicious envy. So jealousy is, apparently in the Old English was actually a positive thing as well, like in the Arabic, ghayra was actually quite a positive thing, it wasn't a bad thing. But now we often mix up envy with jealousy, I think.
But even here, he defines it essentially as a positive thing. He says, if you wish to see your Muslim brother deprived of something that contains no benefit for him, that is ghayra. So
That's positive, yeah. That's what I'm saying, because obviously we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ghayra as well. So some people sometimes translate it as jealousy. And once actually I questioned Abdul Hakim Murad about that, because he mentioned that Allah is jealous. And I said to him, look, it's wrong you shouldn't say that, because that's quite a negative term, jealousy in English. But he said, no, in the classical English it's actually not. It's actually the same as ghayra in Arabic. But nowadays we see jealousy. So how it's used nowadays, local English, it's quite negative, so probably we'll try to avoid describing that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But like in the Bible, they say your God is a jealous God, for example. In the Old English, it's not considered a negative. So same as in Arabic, ghayra is not considered negative, it's positive. فهذا هو الفرق بين هذه الخصال. Is that clear for everyone? Yeah, the difference between those three. Hasad, ghibta, ghayra.
Yes, definition for solicitude is care and concern for others.
That's a good term, isn't it? Solicitude. وأما ضد الحسد فالنصيحة. So how are we going to combat hasad? the opposite of it, we do the opposite, which is nasiha, which is to want good for someone. So if we ever feel in our heart something bad towards another Muslim, then we should try to replace that with nasiha. Nasiha literally means to wish good for that person. To wish good for that person. And the ulama say you should actually then make dua for the person. You know, immediately make dua for the person. That is a very effective way of killing the hasad straight away. If you feel any hasad towards someone, a Muslim, just immediately just make dua, the opposite of the feeling of hasad, and it will kill the hasad.
Is that, sorry, you know, Nasiyah here, isn't that the same as concern and care? Here he defines Nasiyah as well wishing. And then well wishing.
To wish well, wish good for that person, you know?
Yeah, that's different than concern. Yeah, okay.
To wish good for that person. So in other words, you actually say, you know, may Allah give him more children, and may he make his children pious, and may Allah give him more wealth, and may give all of that in sadaqah. Because to make dua for wealth for someone is not always a good thing.
So just to put an example, and so give that, for example, someone gives a charity, and you wish to, Allah bestows you with as much wealth so you can compete in giving to charity, or without depriving that person. So that's good. With Gaira, if someone's got cancer, you wish that Allah removes that cancer from that individual. You have that concern.
Possibly that could be one example, yeah.
And then with well wishing, it's just like generally a dua ultimately for goodness for that person. For that
nasiha,
yeah.
To wish for good for that person. Obviously, normally people use the term nasiha meaning something you go and say to the person, good advice. But that's one form of nasiha, because when you give good advice, it means you wish good for that person. So nasiha is actually to wish good for the person. It could be through dua, or it could be through giving a verbal advice. Often nowadays people, they say they're giving nasiha, but they're not really giving good advice. They're really just putting that person down. And that's because they themselves are arrogant and they want to bash the person over the head with a hadith or something. Yeah? So that's not really nasiha. What people think is nasiha. That's just boosting one's own ego. What was I going to say? Yeah, with the ghaira, about the cancer, I think more in this context what they mean is that person has got something which is detrimental to their deen, not to their health.
Okay.
Detrimental to their deen. Yeah. And you sort of wish that they don't have that, because you want for their deen, you see what I mean? Yeah. That would be considered ghaira for the deen. So, you know, it could be, for example, they have money but they're spending it on wrong things. Yeah. You see what I mean? And you sort of wish for them to lose that, but only because you want them to be rectified. Sincerely, you want them to be rectified. That something like that is how I would take it. Yeah, exactly. You want their deen. You want them to. You don't want them to be disobeying Allah through whatever that thing is. You know, they have. So that's ghaira for the deen. You know, for the sake of the deen. Maybe, for example, someone mentioned those Khaliji Arabs who go around, you know, in gambling dens and all these places. You know, you might say, you might in a way wish they don't have that money because they're spending on fasad, you know, disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it was for really sincerely for that intention, then it would be ghaira for the deen. You know, you're angry the way they're disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you see. That type of thing is ghaira. So then nasiha to wish good for the Muslim brother or sister, وهي إرادة بقاء نعم الله تعالى على أخيك المسلم مما له فيها صلاح. So you see someone who has got, let's say they've got pious children and you don't have children, you feel hasad. But the opposite of that nasiha is you wish that he has more children and may Allah give him pious children, and etc. Because once again, making dua to have children is may be detrimental if they're unrighteous children. So always add, may Allah give them pious children. Or if you make someone, well, that Allah give them wealth, make sure you add to that, that the wealth doesn't become a fitna and a tribulation for them, because the wealth is one of the easy ways to get into sin and into the hellfire as well. فإن قيل كيف نعلم أنه له فيها صلاحا أو فسادا لننصحه أو نحسده. So he says, if someone was to ask, how can you sometimes know if the thing may be good for the person or bad for the person? You know, if you see someone with a lot of money, for example, how do you know? Is it good for them, or is it going to be bad for them? You know, it could be quite difficult to know. فاعلم أنه قد يكون لنا غالب الظن بذلك وغلبة الظن منا تجري مجرى العلم في هذه المواضع. He says here you can never know for sure, 100% certainty, what is going to be good or bad for someone. Only Allah knows, you know. Someone could have wealth, they could be giving a lot of sadaqah today. Tomorrow they may get corrupted, no one knows. But he says in these type of situations we have to go with ghalabatul dhan. What's the most preponderant? What's the most preponderant idea, or what's the most likely scenario? And for these sort of issues, he means, these sort of issues, ghalabatul dhan is the same as ilm, meaning there's different states or situations within the Sharia. In some of them we only do things by yaqeen, but in many of them, probably in most cases, ghalabatul dhan is considered the same as ilm or yaqeen, because there's often things we can never have certainty in things. We just have to go with, as long as we're 90% sure or something. There's very few things you can actually you're 100% sure about, There are certain things we go on yaqeen, for example the prayer times, in fiqh. You don't pray until you have 100% yaqeen that the prayer time is in. So you should wait until you have that yaqeen. But most things we do by just ghalabatul dhan. And this is one of those things. ثم إن اشتبه عليك فلا تريدن زوال نعمة عن أحد من المسلمين أو بقاءها إلا مقيدا بالتفويض وشرط الصلاح لتخلص من حكم الحسد ويحصل لك فائدة النصيحة. He says, obviously, if we can't be sure if something is going to be good for someone, but then you can always put in the extra condition. So if you make, like I said, if you make dua for someone to Allah give them wealth, but put in straight away, and may Allah make it a good blessing for them and make them give sadaqah and not make it a trial or a tribulation for them. Or if you make dua for someone to have children, say, they're desperate to have children, oh Allah give them children, make them pious, make them a source of barakah for them, etc. So I've always put in those conditions that Allah makes it also a good thing for them, because ultimately we don't know what's good or bad for someone. It's like the story about that person. He said once he made dua, oh Allah, I just ask you for my food and drink and shelter and nothing else. That's enough for me. And the next day some people came and they threw him into prison. So he had his food, his drink and shelter and nothing else. So then that was the moral of that was always make sure if you make dua for something, always say Allah make it good for me as well, better for me. So he says ma'al afiyah, I want food, drink and shelter, but with afiyah, with a good. Afiyah is one of those du'as that you should always make. It's one of those really encompassing. The Prophet also encouraged that as well, to ask for afiyah.
What is afiyah?
Because afiyah literally means to be in a good state, or a nice, to be in a happy state, or safe, secure, all of that. It's quite hard to put one word on it, but it means in a safe and secure and settled, you could say, state of, afiyah is to be, it's to do with peace, security, all of that comes into it. In a good state, not in a troubled state. So always be careful of asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for things as well without adding. If you ask Allah for giving you more rizq, always add, make it a blessing, don't make it a tribulation for you. I won't relate it now, I don't remember the details of the story. If there was a Sahabi, if anyone knows, they can, who wanted lots of wealth, and he was saying to the Prophet ﷺ to ask him, but ultimately turned into a tribulation for him. So that's nasiha. فاعلم أنه قد يكون لنا غالبا وأما حسن النصيحة المانع من الحسد فهو ذكر ما أوجبه الله تعالى من موالاة المسلمين. So he said, then what is the protection against hasad? What is the protection? Is to think about the fact of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us regarding our Muslim brothers and sisters. So it's a knowledge cure. Shaykh Uthman Dan Fodio, in his very short book about, very short section of Tasawwuf, he mentions for each disease a knowledge cure and an action cure. So I think it's quite useful categorization. So this is an example of a knowledge cure. So any disease like hasad, kibr, etc., you have a knowledge aspect to the cure, and you have an action aspect, which means certain things you have to do, to get rid of that disease. So for hasad, we could say the action cure is to make dua for that person. The knowledge cure is these type of aspects that we should think about deeply. The fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given everyone their rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given everyone whatever they have that you feel hasad about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who's divided that up amongst you. He's given that person that, and He hasn't given you that thing. So why have hasad? It's ultimately from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So also to think about the rights of the Muslim brothers and sisters, reflect upon that. So it's to do with getting into the knowledge. وحسن هذا الحسن ذكر ما عظم الله تعالى من حق المؤمن ورفع من قدره. And the protection of that protection, in other words, the thing we have to reflect about regarding Muslim brothers and sisters is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has elevated the rights of the believers, the rights of the mu'min, and his rank. وَمَا لَهُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى مِنَ الْكَرَامَاتِ الْعَظِيمَةِ فِي الْعُقْبَةِ. And the great blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give to the believers in the next world. To understand the rank of the mu'min and the Muslim brother or sister. وَمَا لَكَ فِيهِ مِنَ الْفَوَائِدِ الْجَلِيلَةِ فِي الدُّنْيَا. Also think deeply about all the great benefits we have from each other, from our Muslim brothers and sisters in this dunya as well. Not just in the akhirah. من التعاون والتظاهر والجماعات والجموعات. All these things that as a community we help one another. When someone is ill, other people go to visit him, to help him. If someone, he runs into financial difficulties, your Muslim brothers and sisters, they help you. All these things, jama'at, that we get together to do jama'at, and the great blessings that come down and the barakah that comes down of getting together with Muslim brothers and sisters, Jumu'at, the Jumu'ah gatherings, the amount of reward we get just for praying Jumu'ah, and how that would not be possible without our Muslim brothers and sisters. Look at all the khair we're getting from our Muslim brothers and sisters around us. ثم ما ترجو من شفاعته في الآخرة. What about the shafa'ah in the next world? If you had a Muslim brother or sister, or a son or daughter or father or mother who was, pious or hafiz of Quran or shaheed, or you just someone who was close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can intercede for you on the Day of Judgment.